Good afternoon and welcome to an Ethical Corporation webinar on currently measuring and reporting your social impact. I'm Anna Uskanga, Project Director at Ethical Corporation. As we have seen over the past few weeks with the COVID-19 pandemic, there is an increasing number of companies looking to help fund and support efforts to fight the pandemic and its impacts. At this time, like now, society expects those that can to step up and help where they can and influence policy debates on social issues. Acting on social issues, while it has its challenges, is relatively easy for corporations. A big challenge we know through our research is the measurement of these actions. Companies are looking to report more than just the financial money spent or outputs from the organization. They need to measure and report the actual outcomes and impacts of that work. We have continually heard this is a key challenge in our research over the past 12 months or more. And as part of the newly launched webinar series, I'm pleased to host today's webinar with three great minds who will share their ideas, strategies, and learning in how to measure your social impact. And it is my pleasure to hand over to Heather Alner, who will lead and moderate today's discussion. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for inviting myself and the panelists to join this discussion today, this online discussion. Obviously very, very necessary with the situation we're all in.
Heather, I think you're mute. We can't hear you.
Oh, hang on. How do I unmute? How do you unmute? Okay, I don't know why I'm on mute. Hello, can you hear me now? It says I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Hello.
I think Heather is having troubles with her microphone, so I'm going to move.
Can you hear me now? Hello. I'm getting information from my team that they can hear me. So I don't know if it was just you, Anna. Other people can hear me. So I'm going to keep going. Johann and Paul, can you hear me? Because it's very important you can hear me as you're the panelists. I cannot hear Paul or...
We can hear you now, Heather. Sorry about
Great,
that.
fantastic, wonderful. So Anna, thank you so much for inviting me to moderate this panel. Really excited to be on this topic. It's a really interesting topic. We have two absolutely fantastic panelists I'm really looking forward to introducing in a minute. And I'm really interested, obviously, as a leader in a large international housing charity, to learn a little bit more about this as well from the two panelists. So first of all, before we hear from the panelists, I'd like to just open up by reflecting on, why companies feel they do have a role to play in achieving social impact. So Anna, if you can move to the next slide, that'd be wonderful. I'll just go through a few statistics that we found very interesting. So a lot of the time, 64% of people globally would expect CEOs to lead on social change rather than waiting for government interventions. That's quite a high percentage. 84% expect CEOs to influence policy debates on social issues and to do this by leading by example. And finally, 40% of millennials believe the goal of businesses should be to improve society. Obviously, these are future employees, future leaders of companies. So there's a definite feeling out there that social impact is important and is important for companies. And I just wanted to quickly quote before I go on to my next slide. Larry Fink, who some of you will know is billionaire, chairman of BlackRock, and he wrote quite a famous letter, you can Google it yourselves, to CEOs. And in it, he said, one of the things that really struck me was, he says, a strong sense of purpose and a commitment to stakeholders helps a company connect more deeply to its customers and adjust to the changing demands of society. Ultimately, purpose is the engine of long-term profitability. So I just thought that would be a nice quote to sort of open up with the panelists. And then Anna, if you move to my next slide, there's a few questions on there just to sort of also start us going. So today we're going to look a little bit about how to navigate that data measurement challenge, what data is material, how do the SDGs, how could they be the key to framing your social impact? And do we need a common metric for reporting the ESGs, obviously the social one being the one we're discussing today. So we've got a very clear and transparent way of comparing corporate reports across the globe. So with that, I will be thrilled to introduce the first panelist. Also happens to be a very dear friend who I've worked with for many, many years, Johann Baar. And he is the Director for Affordable Housing and Technology at the Hilti Foundation. So with that, Johann, I will pass over to you.
All right, now I got unmuted. Thank you, Heather, for your introduction. And I actually think the quote that you mentioned presents pretty much of what we believe at Hilti and at the Hilti Foundation about social activities and social engagement. It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me. I would like to start with a quick overview of the Hilti Foundation and what we do. The Hilti Foundation, in fact, is a joint venture of the Hilti family and the Hilti Corporation. And as such, we engage for social impact on behalf of the Hilti Group. I believe with that, we are one typical example of how corporations engage for social impact. I believe the majority of enterprises does that via corporate foundations. For those of you who may not know Hilti, we are a multinational company from Liechtenstein, and we develop, manufacture, and market products for the construction, building maintenance, energy, and manufacturing industries. Next slide, please, Anna. For the foundation, we selected 3 priority fields for our activities. One, and that was mentioned already, is affordable housing and technology, which obviously is close to our business side. With Habitat for Humanity as our main partner, we seek to improve the housing situation of thousands of families in need, focusing mostly on disaster-resistant and sustainable housing technologies. The second field is called Music for Social Change, and it tries to develop programs that bring kids from disadvantaged backgrounds into classical music orchestras to learn key skills and values like concentration, punctuality, listening to each other, cooperation, etc. Economic empowerment is our newest field of engagement, and it seeks to add economic competence to development cooperation, focusing on smallhold enterprises in East Africa. The Hilti Foundation is just one of Hilti's foundations. We have sister foundations engaging for the arts and culture, for local development in Liechtenstein, and also for women empowerment globally. What else is important about this slide? I believe it already shows one of the biggest challenges in measuring impact. It tries to make impact comparable in between fields and to justify investments by naming the number of beneficiaries that we believe we reach with each of the fields. The problem, the only common denominator is the number of beneficiaries, and we don't know if it really changed their awareness or behavior of the people we reached out to, if their life situation changed to the better after the intervention, or if the intervention created any kind of long-term change. Next slide, please. In fact, when we look at the literature, reaching the beneficiary does not even qualify as impact. And like many others, we usually use this chart to illustrate what impact means for us. Reaching families with an intervention, according to this chart, is simply a prerequisite for impact. Only if we help change the life situation of a group of individuals or even society, we can actually speak of impact. So for us at the Hilti Foundation, that's quite complex, because when you think about what does it mean to change a life situation, It refers, in fact, to very many aspects, and many of this, next slide please, are described by the Social Development Goals of the United Nations. Next slide, please. It is better health for families, it is more income, it is better education, it is social inclusion that represent core elements for us of helping families in need lead a better and independent life. And probably it needs all of this together to be able to change your life to the better through your own means. We all know that measuring impact in this sense is really hard because it shows only after a long time, and achieving, for example, just better education does not always result in a better life situation overall. Next slide, please. We also often do not know exactly if it is our intervention that created this change. In fact, it is not possible to design a project that follows a linear process like presented on the first chart, from output via outcome to impact. We believe at the Hilti Foundation that impact is multifaceted and depends on many different kinds of developments and interventions like this chart shows. Next chart, please. At Hilti, this is why we believe that understanding what leads to impact is more important than measuring final results or final impact. We believe we need to set clear targets for each level of a project that defines how we move from reaching the target group to changing behaviors to changing life situations. If we track such progress on an annual basis, or even better on a more short-term basis, and driven by an understanding what we want to achieve, we also understand how far we get in terms of creating impact and where we need to re-strategize. So this chart basically shows what we feel is needed to execute in each little aspect of a program, and a program can cover many activities that we deal with, and many sub-targets sort of reaching something that we consider impact. And for each of these sub-targets, we would try to create such a cycle of planning a strategy, planning the execution, tracking and how far we were able to reach those targets, and then possibly re-strategize or steer again for better impact if we feel those targets were not achieved on the path towards larger social impact. Next slide, please. In the end, our tracking looks somehow like this. Wherever we realize we are misaligned with a certain target, we readjust together with our partners, and we use basically quantitative and qualitative criteria to understand, is this really on track with what we consider the path towards a holistic social impact. And we basically just use a red and green light system to understand, is this where we are on track, or is this a field where we need to readjust our activities because we feel with the targets that we set, we are not reaching the social impact that stands at the end of our activities. And last but not least, since impact is so multifaceted, we strongly believe in what I show here as the SDG number 17 in partnership for the goals. Because of the multifaceted nature of social impact, there's probably not one project or one activity alone that can get us there. We need to understand what others do in the sector. We need to realign with them, and we need to cooperate. And I believe it's important that we also show the results of our analyses and the data that we created to track our impact, so that we can work together to achieve a larger global good. And that's what, for me, SDG 17 represents. I'm happy to share a little bit more of the details of our work later on, some examples of our projects, but maybe for now, I will leave it with that. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Johann. Really interesting. I really like to comment, for example, on measuring impact that you mentioned at the beginning of your slides, where you talked about you as a foundation, as a corporate foundation, are supporting different fields. And how do you measure across those different fields when they're all doing different things at different levels of, some are going very deep with the impact they're having on the beneficiaries, some are not, and how do you compare one to one? And then obviously between companies.
Sorry, Heather, can you repeat this question? There was a voice in
between.
between.
No, it was not a question. It was just a comment about. I like the fact that you were comparing the different activities that you support at the Hilti Foundation, and that it's quite difficult to compare them one to one because they're very different and they have different impacts. I also liked your comment towards the end about the importance of partnership and working with others, and how do you measure that? And also then you talked about reviewing and potentially rerouting, and I think that's really important too, that the work that is done in the social sphere is not always easy. If it was easy, we wouldn't be needed, and sometimes you do need to really reflect on multiple times across your project to see whether you're doing what you think is the right thing, and be able to actually then review and reroute or re-steer if needed. So that was very interesting too. But I do have a question for you, Johann. So how do you at the Hilti Foundation maximize the impact of the social impacts? How do you maximize your return on investments to sort of see maximum impact on society?
I think for us it's important that we usually start with a very precise analysis of the sector in which we want to achieve change. And then we would start with a prototype project, which probably has quite a high initial cost in terms of investment in in creating some kind of change. But in prototyping a certain intervention and in tracking whether we feel in the end this is really creating change, we are able to understand what is really needed to rearrange our activities, to discuss with partners where are we wrong, do we need to work with others or with other activities. And once we sort of have a proof of concept, we try to scale or accelerate the intervention at a larger level or replicate it in other geographies. And I believe there it's not always us as a family and corporate foundation, but we also try to share our proof of concepts with others and hope that others will join forces with us in making those interventions really go to scale.
Great, thank you so much, Johann. So we'll now move on to our second absolutely fantastic panelist, Paul Druckman. He is the chairman of the board of the World Benchmarking Alliance. And I'm really interested to hear what Paul will have to say. I know, for example, on Johann's presentation, on one of his slides, he talked about tracking, and it was in brackets. On Johann's slide, it talked about outputs, outcomes, and impact, all of which are different. And I know Paul's going to touch on that amongst many other topics throughout his presentation. So over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you very much, Heather, and thank you, Johann, as well. So I'm going to really address the reporting and measurement side of this, and and then come back to impacts and things, because I think Johann, frankly, has covered that probably better than I could have possibly done. So let me see where we get to, because I think there are two types of reporting that we need to think about, reporting and measurement. One is the corporate's own reporting, and the other is reporting across corporates by others. So I'm going to break my comments down into those two. So let me start with the latter, which is across corporates. And if you can just move to the next slide. So I chair the World Benchmarking Alliance, which has only recently been created and was sort of officially launched during Climate Week back in September in New York. And what we've done with the Benchmarking Alliance is we are saying that it's very difficult to align the SDGs to corporates and their own measurement. It isn't impossible, but it's very difficult. So what we've done is we've created the idea of the fact that we need system transformations in order to create the change that the SDGs are trying to make. And within each of these systems, so whether it be agriculture and food or whether it be the energy sector, within each of these systems, there are a number of the SDGs that are addressed in that system, and they overlap. And so what we call the power of 7, or the 7 system transformations, are shown here in the diagram. What we've also done is back in the end of January at the World Economic Forum, we announced the 2,000 organizations that are most impactful on the world in terms of the SDGs. So in other words, it's picking out, I say organizations because it's not just companies, some of them are state-owned organizations and other forms of incorporation. But the idea is these 2,000 have such a dramatic effect that if we can understand what they're doing in terms of benchmarks and rankings, then we can really understand the change. And the other thing, the one thing I wanted to highlight is that the social transformation sits right at the heart of all of the other transformations. And in fact, we will be covering all 2,000 organizations within the social transformation, which is where impact is most effective. So what we really are wanting to do is to rank and benchmark these organizations with the hope that the organizations themselves will use this as peer pressure to make sure that they are not in the bottom half of the ranking. And I have to say that since we announced what we call the SDG 2000, we are inundated with those 2,000 organizations trying to find out what the methodology is and where they will perform. We don't, all of our work is open, transparent, and free, because the idea is it's not hidden behind a wall, and it isn't just for investors, it's for individuals and for anybody else who wants to access it. So I do think that this is going to be influential in understanding the impacts of business in the world that we live in. Okay, if you could move on a couple of slides if you can, Anna. Keep going, and again, one more there. Now I want to just focus a little, if I can, on back again to the cartoon. That's the one. To the idea of the self-report, the reporting by corporates, which is the second section. And I love this little cartoon. It talks exactly to what's happening at the moment, where people are trying to do the right thing, but all they're doing is adding to the landscape of organizations dealing with it. And that goes from the work that the European Commission are currently putting into place with the non-financial reporting directive, to what happened at the World Economic Forum with the WEF and the IBC coming up with some metrics. And there are myriad such things happening. I have to say that I've been in this game for about 10 years, and the standards and frameworks that exist are basically independent. And if I was being harsh, I would say somewhat self-serving at times. I mean, I sit on the board of SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. I was one of the founders of Integrated Reporting, and then up until recently, I chaired the UK Accounting Standards Board here in London. And I have to say that a lot of what's going on in the space is clear to me, and yet I recognize what a mess it really is. I was involved in a task force last year that Accountancy Europe did, Accountancy Europe being the network of the accounting bodies across the European Union. And they produced a paper at the end of the year called Interconnected Reporting, which came up with some options and some recommendations about how all of these financial and non-financial standards could be brought together. And one of the key recommendations was about the use of the IFRS Foundation, on which the international accounting standards are overseen. The other thing I just wanted to bring to your attention is I've been chairing a project for the UK regulator, the Financial Reporting Council, on the future of corporate reporting. And some of the findings that this paper will be bringing through during this year are around the system rather than around the standards. And some of the key, just a couple of key elements of that are that the system itself, we seem to have forgotten why we're doing reporting. And what we need is a reporting network, not an annual report. We need to make sure that those reports that are produced are objective driven, not just for a particular audience as the complete focus of reporting. There will be some reports that'll be where the objective is for an audience, but there'll be others that are written for different purposes. And we need to make sure that we don't confuse that, or at least we broaden it. The other key element of our recommendations will be around technology, where at the moment we are completely fixated, in my view, with the idea of the company pushing information to stakeholders and others and regulators, etc., rather than the user, the audience, being able to pull information from the information that's sitting in the being produced by the company. The technology is there. We're just obsessed with PDFs. We're creating something for a report rather than allowing the user to understand to draw out what they want. And my final point that we brought through in our project paper is the idea that perhaps there should be a mandatory public interest statement or impact report, which is more directly related to what we're talking about here around social impact. And this, if the regulator starts to make social impact reporting mandatory, we will see great innovation. Of course, the danger being that all we'll see is compliance. But I do believe that this is a space that is ready for action. And I do believe that 2020 was going to be the year of real change. Whether that will now move into 2021, we'll have to see. That was my contribution, and happy to join in the conversation as we go through. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, very interesting. Actually, funny, as I was listening to you presenting, I was thinking of the question that I wanted to ask you immediately afterwards. I will ask it, but I think you may have just answered it. So how do you create a tool? Because I love the idea that you're going to now work with 2,000 companies and you're comparing company versus company in terms of their measuring their social impact. But how do you create a tool that is then used across the corporate sector? And how do you ensure it is used and completed correctly? What are your thoughts on that? I feel like you've touched on it a little bit, but
yeah, well, there are already some very good benchmark tools and ranking tools out there. I'm excluding from that the commercial sort of the providers just for the investors, the MSCIs and others. I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying that I think what we're talking about here is something different. And in fact, at the Alliance, we are looking for those benchmarks and rankings to bring into the Alliance. So, for example, the existing corporate human rights benchmark is now part of the social system transformation benchmark that we are creating. And the climate benchmark that we're creating under the climate and energy is actually being developed by the CDP because they've got the data and the information. And the fact that the methodology and the results are completely open mean that we're hoping that both technology providers and corporates themselves will start to use that methodology in their own working, so that it isn't something that is out there in a silo.
Right, yeah, good, thank you so much. So I think, Anna, we are now opening up to questions from the audience. I believe, Anna, you're keen for people either to type those into the chat box and I will read them out. I think that is correct. And I've got a few more questions I'll ask in the meantime as people think of their questions. So I guess this is now for both panelists in a way. They're quite different. Obviously, as you can probably tell, both panelists are playing a different role, which is good. It's good to have diversity on the panel. So the question will be answers, I guess, answer will be very different for both of you. But I suppose the question for Johann, having heard now what Paul has presented, I'm just curious at the Hilti Foundation, I mean, what tools would you feel would be useful to you as a corporate foundation to measure the social impact that you have? Is there something you feel you're missing? Is there something missing on the market that you would use? Yeah, over to you, Johann, on that one.
Thank you, Heather. I'm sorry, I was still unmuted. I think definitely there are a couple of things, and most importantly for me, I liked what you said, Paul, in terms of we need to make our reporting more objective driven, and that basically expressed very much of the things that I try to say. I believe instead of showing what we achieved, it's really much more about creating coalitions of organizations from all worlds, could be enterprises, but also public and third sector organizations that try to understand what objectives are we, what kind of social change are we trying to achieve, and how can we, with all the different aspects and competencies that we bring to the table, how can we work together to achieve this jointly, and how can we share targets with each other? How can we cooperate in terms of making social change work? And I believe for this, it is much more important to sit together or to share your data and your analyses in terms of what you try to achieve and how you try to achieve it, rather than to showcase where you really achieved something. And in having a tool that would bring together actors from different sectors in joining forces, for example, on affordable housing, where we work together, Heather, that would be incredible.
Yeah.
Can I just add, Heather, that
yeah.
One of the things I think where this links together is that corporate reporting of 10 years ago, when I was involved with integrated reporting and various other things happening around the world, was moving towards from outputs towards outcomes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the danger is that we're stuck at outcomes and we haven't moved on to what Johann was talking about, which is the impacts. You know, and that differentiator I think is really important. I don't think there is a hard line between outcomes and impacts, but there is a fuzzy line. There is an overlap, and I worry that that corporations, when they're looking at social impact, are not really identifying the difference between outcomes, which to me are fundamentally things that come back and affect their organization, as against broad, you know, the other end of impacts, where it may not have any influence or effect on the organization itself. It's just something that is affecting society. And at the moment, I think we're not getting to that stage.
Yeah, I think it's another one of my questions actually, and there is a question from the audience which I'll ask in a second. But I think it's interesting, what evolution have you both seen in the past years amongst the sort of desire for what social impact people want to see? I mean, maybe this is maybe more for Johann, and he has to put his Hilti Corporation hat on, but in terms of your customers and your client base, what desire do they have to see the social impact that you're making? And has there been a shift in that over the last few years, would you say?
I believe definitely people become more aware of social impacts that is created through corporations. And I believe one field where we see this very strongly is in human resource management, that many candidates for jobs are interested in what Hilti does in terms of social change, in terms of social impact. And we feel at the Hilti Foundation that also the majority probably of our members of staff strongly support the foundation. They try to inform themselves what we do and how we do it. And we constantly get requests of employees that ask, how can we support what you do? How can we help create impact? And at Hilti, we really try to sort of blur the line between what the foundation does and what the corporation does by bringing in the expertise of our employees into our projects, especially in my field, affordable housing technology. That's comparatively easy, obviously, because we rely on the knowledge and expertise of engineers. And I feel in all my conversations with our employees that they really try to understand what is it that we can do. And then the same applies to customers, which are similar in mindset in a way. And they try to understand, what does Hilti do? Is there something where we can join forces? And we feel there's a strong interest in the work of the foundation.
That's really, really encouraging. Yeah, really encouraging. Paul, anything to say on that question, or we can move on to the,
Just very quickly, I think one of the things, and I'm sure it'll come up in the questions, is that, you know, one of the opportunities, and I hate to say that, out of where we are at the moment with the crisis over the virus, is the fact that people, I hope, are starting to think about the corporations and what is their purpose. Yeah, and we're seeing it with individuals, but also with corporations. And are we saving, you know, providing grants and loans, government grants and loans from the people to the right organizations? And I think it's a great opportunity for us to understand better organizations such as Hilti.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so going to some of the audience's questions now. Question for you, Paul. Isn't the World Benchmarking Alliance just another standard, albeit one that aggregates existing standards? And shouldn't the role of aggregation be done by a neutral or international body with existing legitimacy, like the UN? And doesn't the language of systems transformation add yet more jargon and complexity to the SDGs? Great question.
Oh, great question. Yeah, thanks for the challenge. I love it. Yes, I think that why I identified the difference between the corporates producing reports and the measurement across corporates is what I was trying to get over. Why I think that what we're doing at the World Benchmarking Alliance is not the same as the reporting of corporates. And going on to the three parts to that, the second part around should there not be an international group that deals, you know, that collaborates and brings together the different reporting standards? I absolutely think there is, and I think I would refer people to this Accountancy Europe interconnected reporting paper, which tries to look at who could do that. And you know, the feeling of the task force that I was on was that the only credible place is the IFRS Foundation, because they do have that legitimacy. I also understand the third point around, does the system transformation not confuse the SDGs? I would just add the challenge back from a corporate point of view, do those people who think that they can identify business with SDGs? Because I struggle with that. And if I'm the only one, that's fine, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. So I'm not trying to be defensive, but I think the challenge is laid down, and I like it. I just think that the first and the last, I would say that we are moving in the right direction.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. So a lot of questions coming up. This is fantastic. So another one, a question now for you, Johann. You said that you focus more on the process than impact that is very difficult to measure. Do you then work with theory of change or similar frameworks to try and kind of, in inverted commas, prove your impact, even if it can't be measured in detail? If you do, could you mention how you develop this? Good question as well. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. Theory of change is definitely one instrument that we apply. But what we try to do together with our partners is not to be too focused on using sort of standardized instruments, but really to understand with the overarching objective that we try to achieve through our programs. What are the steps that need to be done to achieve that? How can we break them down into individual targets that are measurable? And how can we bring all this into a process that is manageable? I would probably say theory of change is an instrument that is guiding this way of thinking, but we are sort of hesitant to use a template or something which we use for all of our program fields or with all of our partners to define the strategy and the path of our programs. In the end, when I look at our music programs, they're probably very different from what we do in affordable housing and technologies. And while the idea to separate it into various steps and into a timeline is the same for all of our programs, the way impact is created is probably completely different from program to program. And there we really try to sit down with our partners and define on an individual basis how can we set up a process over the time frame of a project that makes sense to us as a coalition of partners.
But Johann, doesn't that mean that potentially you could have a theory of change model for each of the different projects?
Yeah,
that could be, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great, lovely. Thank you so much, Johann, for that, and thank you, Nina, for the question. So now a question for Paul from Yolanda. And could you expand more on what you mean by focusing more on the system than standards? What system-based approach should corporates use?
System rather than standards. I'm struggling with that one. I see that. What I'm really saying is that in the future corporate reporting system, we're saying that it isn't just about the metrics and the disclosure. It's about how you are disclosed, what your target is in terms of the audience or the regulator, the individual regulator, the investor, whatever it happens to be. And the problem is that the system that we have at the moment of annual reports and sustainability reports, etc., are all completely focused on the audience. And that means that you very rarely see what it is the company wants to say. It's all about what they think the audience wants to hear. And I think there's a danger in that. What we need is a central transparency, central report, which in our project we've defined as a business report, which is actually what is the company saying about its theory of change, about its impacts, about its purpose, etc. Not for any particular audience, but for itself, if you like, its purpose. because there's that great Harvard Business Review quote which talks about how a successful business should be measured by what management are trying to achieve, not what shareholders are dictating. And I think the dominance of shareholders in corporate reporting has to be broken.
So yeah, thank you for that, Paul. And actually very nicely moves on to the next question, which has come from Lawrence, who asks, what role does stakeholder feedback play in your measurement processes? Obviously, Lawrence works at Keystone Accountability. We help organizations improve their performance by harnessing feedback from those they seek to serve, as they, in capital letters, are the ones who can clearly identify the impact of a service that is being provided. How does this feature in your measurement processes? Maybe if you want to go first, Paul, and then we can ask Johann as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very good challenge, because to my mind, the danger we have is that we talk about numbers. We set KPIs, and we're talking about either monetized KPIs or a figure. And actually, what we're really saying is that if we are setting ourselves goals, then we should have evidence of our success or failure. And there's a big difference between a KPI being a number and some sort of evidence, such as survey work and other work. Now, the survey may come up with a number, but the danger again is that we're just looking at a raw number. So I agree. I think we do need evidence of achieving what we set out to do, and we must get away from this notion that has to either be without doubt monetized or without doubt a number, because of the unintended consequences of KPIs.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Paul. So Johann, because you do have stakeholders at the Hilti Corporation who are the main source of the foundation's funding. So keen to hear also how do you get feedback from the stakeholders and incorporate that?
I'm not exactly sure which kind of stakeholders are meant. When we speak about the communities that we try to serve with our programs, the beneficiaries in a sense, it's obvious that before we actually set the targets for that we try to measure and where we evaluate whether our programs are on track, we need to interact with our target groups and understand how we actually set those targets. What is it that will change their life situation, and then reevaluate again when we have the numbers in place. Is this still how we feel we can help them change their life situation in the long term? So it's a constant process of speaking with one another and understanding of those measures that we are implementing. Are they really capable of achieving our objectives? And that's obviously, as Paul says, not just number driven, but we feel we can at least try to set KPIs that are based on these interactions.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Great, thanks, Johann. Fantastic. Okay, another question here from the audience to both of you. When measuring impact, the status quo is to focus on outputs, which often results in mainly quantitative data. Actually, Paul, you've touched on this already, and disregards qualitative data or perceptive data that can only be collected through beneficiary feedback. How do you address this, and how do you ensure that this is not just an extractive exercise, but something that also benefits those you are collecting the data from? Paul, maybe you want to go first on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the premise of what sits behind the question, and I think I talked quite a lot to my own sort of belief that we are stuck in quantitative and we need qualitative. I mean, in integrated reporting, when we used to see reports from all over the world, from Japan, from China, from wherever it happened to be, South Africa, and I used to sometimes write to these organizations as the CEO to their CEO and say, they're very pleased with your integrated report, and make some suggestions. And the term I never used to them, but I used in presentations, was that be careful not to put lipstick on a pig. And I think there is a danger that we manipulate the numbers to make it look good rather than tell the story.
Right.
And telling the story is more qualitative.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's why when Johann, when you were presenting, I really, and I appreciate this, that you really talked about, measuring your KPIs, your outputs, your outcomes, and your impact, but then also, looking and reviewing, and not just putting a pretty picture, but saying we really want to help these people and we want to have social impact. Let's have a look at whether we are doing that, and let's look beyond just the numbers. Let's look at the process. Let's look at the qualitative. I'm almost asking a question for you, Johann, but please, do also say your thoughts.
Yeah,
on that.
thank you. I believe probably I'm in the lucky situation that this is sort of my job description, to understand the qualitative context of what we do and what we try to achieve, and not just look at the numbers that partner organizations or others may send to us, but really try to sit down with everyone and break that down into measurable steps that at the same time enable us to include qualitative feedback and not just look at the numbers. So I believe as a foundation, we are close enough to our programs and to the people we try to support to really get an understanding on a qualitative level of what is needed and how do we need to readjust, as you say, Heather, our programs in order to make them work better for those that they try to support and the objectives they try to target. And this is exactly as Paul said, what goes beyond storytelling, because I feel that's really the great danger, that when you go away from numbers, that you start looking into individual stories that are easy to be presented as a success for a project, although they don't really cover what you have achieved, but they might be just one example of thousands that were not successful in achieving what you wanted to do.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Johann. We've got about 8 more questions still, not too much time, but we'll keep going. Paul, one more for you. How will NGOs partners, so NGOs that are partnering with corporations, feed into the benchmarking and or be recognized for their contributions?
Well, the benchmarking is done, the methodology is created through extensive consultation and roundtables. And so, if an NGO has a particular one of the system transformations that they think is key to what their focus, then please contact the Benchmark Alliance if we haven't contacted you, because the idea is to be fully transparent, fully get everybody involved.
Yeah, great. Okay, good answer. Good. So Jess, who asked that question, please feel free to have a look at the benchmarking work that they're doing and contact them. Okay, next question, going a bit quicker now because we've not got too much time. What advice this is Jill, what advice do you have for creating strong KPIs to track and communicate social impact? Maybe Johann, that one for you.
I think that refers to much of what I explained, that I really try to break our KPIs down into little steps and to look at maybe the next 6 months or just the next year and try to understand what is it that we need to do over the next half year to achieve a larger goal, and to define KPIs for just this period to see are we on track in terms of what we try to achieve.
Can I just add to that very quickly?
Yes.
That I totally agree with Johann. I would articulate it as that it has to start at strategy and then move down to KPIs.
Right. Yeah. Good. Thank you both. Okay, next question, and this is a really interesting one, obviously, in the current situation we're in, from Jennifer. Thank you so much, she says, to the panelists, and she then goes on to ask, do you think the current pandemic will push organizations and regulators to mandate non-financial reporting? Maybe that's for you, Paul.
Oh, please God, let that happen. And what we've got to do is to try and make sure it does, that we haven't once we get through the crisis, and I'm personally, some of my family are personally affected, so I'm worried about the current. But I think, when we get out of this, please, let's learn the lessons.
Right. Great. Yeah, hopefully. Okay, next question for Johann. Can you please reflect on any examples of where you have developed prototypes and then scaled up projects / interventions? That's from Charlotte.
Sure, happy to do that. Probably the best example of our work of the Hilti Foundation are our bamboo houses in the Philippines. We started in 2013 creating a technology as Hilti that is disaster resistant and affordable to build houses for people in need with bamboo as a sole structural element. So they were sustainable, they are locally produced, they create value in the Philippines, and on top they are affordable and disaster resistant, which means they withstand typhoons and earthquakes, proven in our Hilti labs, and they come at a direct cost of $5,000 to $6,000. We built around 800 houses in the Philippines with all the processes that are probably known, like interaction with beneficiaries. We try to understand the legal context of building codes, etc., etc., etc. And having built those 800 houses, and that we learned that they withstood all these earthquakes and typhoons, the families moved in and were happy. We started a cooperation with Habitat for Humanity in building 10,000 of those houses in just one province of the Philippines. And we believe this sets an example of how an ecosystem can be established that uses a technology that has been proven in a smaller context, and that we hope we manage to enable to persist even without the direct intervention of the Hilti Foundation or its partners.
Mm.
And obviously,
Right.
there were a lot of tracking and KPIs and very strong involvement both from Hilti and the Hilti Foundation, as well as partners, in terms of readjusting how do we set up these processes, how do we change the technology, how do we set up financial mechanisms to help families invest into houses, how do we help create community empowerment and livelihood opportunities for the families who moved in. So it basically represents this complex networks of outputs and outcomes and impact that is so multifaceted.
Great, thank you, Johann. And 12 partners, except for us, right, working on it. So it's a really, as Paul referred to in his presentation, it's really the whole system working together to ensure success.
Exactly.
On that project. I don't know, Anna, how are you feeling? We've got 2 more minutes to go according to my iPhone. Do we thank people and close up, or do we have time for one more question?
I think we can have one more question and then we can close up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really sorry for those people that we did not manage to ask a question. Just so much interest here in questions, which is fantastic. Maybe I'll ask the last one, which is, do you, and I totally understand why Faye's asking this, do you have any great examples of social metrics in the financial services? Maybe Paul, you can answer that one.
I'm thinking about it. I don't have time to think. I do, but I just can't think of any at the moment. I mean, organizations like, well, like Hermes, some of the I wouldn't call them the socially responsible investors, but the investors that are at the middle section of the spectrum of capital, you'll find provide that sort of information.
Yeah. All right.
I'll have to think about it.
No,
Sorry.
I know. I mean, we as a non-profit do work with a number of banks, Faye, and we have programs running on access to affordable finance for really those at the bottom of the pyramid, those poorest families in the world, so they can access finance that they then use to purchase materials and labor and build homes with. So I know that some of the major banks across Europe work with us on that, and those are the social metrics that they use. If that's
Big Society Capital may be a place to look, Heather.
Yeah, that's another one too. Great, lovely. Thank you so much to everybody. What a great number of questions. Really sorry we couldn't answer all of them, but very encouraging to see so much interest in this topic. And thank you to both of the panelists, Paul and Johann. Really fantastic discussion. Yeah, really appreciate it, especially in these times that you found the time to come and do this this panel. Thank you so much. And thank you, Anna, for organizing it all.
Thank you to the panelists as well. Thank you, Heather, John, and Paul, for taking the time and sharing your insights with us. Thank you, everyone, for listening and being part of this excellent discussion. And I just want to reminder that we will send the webinar recordings next week. As mentioned at the start of the discussions, today's webinar is part of our newly launched webinar series, and we have a number of interesting and business critical webinars planned for the coming weeks. So do visit ethicalcorp.com/RBS and click on the Digital Library tab, where you can see all the upcoming webinars and also access all the briefings and past webinar recordings that we have done. And once again, I would like to thank everyone for listening, the speakers for sparing their time to share their work and ideas. And finally, I would like to wish you all the very best in the coming weeks and months, and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.